what we are going to do now is to use this action in our components. How? Well, let's go to the main component and remember that we have the three possibilities here. The root for the front, that will be to render home, the new game will be to render game, and the continue game, now what we are going to do is to render game but with a new prop. That will be using the game component but with a prop continue that can be the default value, or directly we can say true. Now in this third case, if we have this path, we will continue the game. We go to the game component and we add a component didMount method. Remember that it is in the of the life cycle, and if this dot props, because we have just added a prop, continue, we have to dispatch fetch state. The possibility to dispatch comes from props. We have to import the action here from the actions fetch state. So what we have here is we get a new param, and we, in the component didMount, we call and dispatch the fetch if we have the param. Let's add a new reducer that is called fetch reducer. It will be the one in charge of this part of the state that is fetch. We have to import fetch from the constants to set the initial state, and this reducer will be very simple. It receives as a state the fetch part, and by default is this one from the constants, and the action that happened as always, and it is, well, let's define the new state here just as an empty variable, and it is just a switch depending on the action type, and well, here the expression will be case fetch state begin. What happens in fetch state begin? This new state will be, as always, JSON parse of JSON stringify the state. This new state has to be modified because in a fetch state begin what we have is fetching set to true, and we return it. Let's add the other possibilities, the other cases, that are case fetch state success. What happens when we've got a success? Well, let me put it at the same level. New state, as always, I have to set new state dot fetching to false, we have finished, and new state to finished to true, we have finished, and return this new state. And finally, the last case will be fetch state failure. Fetch state failure. No, sorry. In this case, I said there's new state. New state. Now we have finished also fetching. and we've got an error, and we have to set it to action.error. Remember, that is where we set the error. We save it there, and we return this new state. In the three cases, we do almost the same, and by default, we just return, as always, what we received. So default return state. I have here, I have to export it, just to be able to use it from the reducers file. And just see what we did. We create a fetch state begin, success or failure possibility, three cases. In each case, we get the state, we modify it just to see if we are fetching or we have finished or we have an error, and take into account that in the success case we are not getting the content here, but we will get it into the other reducers, because it is there where we will modify the other parts of the state. Here we only modify the part of the state that the fetch reducer considers or treats, that is this fetch, with fetching, finished or error. Okay, let's integrate this fetch reducer with our reducers. We are going to the reducers.jsx file and import fetch reducer from the file, from fetch reducer, and look here, we have three parts of our state: turn, values, and the final part of our state will be fetch. And it will be modified by this reducer. The other reducers will have also a small modification. For example, the game reducer will have a case here that when we get a fetch state success, when we get data in the action, remember that we will get, let's see the actions. In the actions, when we get a fetch state success, we just have a state here with the JSON received. Let's introduce it here. So action.state.values, because when we get a state from a server, we return here the values. This is the game reducer. Remember, or look here and see that it considers or treats the values, and the same happens with the turn. We will have a new case here, to add a new case. When we get data, valid data, a success, we will return action.state.turn. Perfect. Now we've got our reducers finished. Now we have to modify our game component. In the game component, remember that we have a new property, continue, to dispatch this fetch state. But in the render, we want to say the user that we are loading the data, or we've got an error, or there is no error and the game has been loaded with remote data. Let's do that. In the render method, we have to add conditions. How? We get this fetch in the props. This fetch state is in the props as always. So did this dot props dot fetch. There we have fetching, the error, and finished. So let's see, if we are fetching, we will return just a message saying that we are fetching. We fetch the saved game. And what happens if we are not fetching? But we get an error. let's add, as almost always, a console log of this error. And let's return another message for the user, but you can do whatever you want. Error getting state from server. We can write here the error or whatever. And finally, if everything goes well, what we will have is this code here. We composed what we get in the previous version. See here that the new term and the values will come from the remote server, and it's the reducer the one in charge when we get the fetch state success. We have changed it. Perfect. There is one last change in this component is here. Remember that we map the state to the props just to be able to have as a prop here fetch. So we have to map it. So fetch state.fetch. So we map the state to the prop, and as a prop we will have fetch here to access and to check different values. Perfect. Everything is finished. Let's check that everything is working. We go and start the development server, and we can get some errors here or in the interface, and if not, we get the interface. We can go to a new game with the empty game, or we can go to continue. You saw there the loading state, and we get here the initial state of this saved game. There is a small bug here. See that when you click on new game, you don't get an empty board because you need the reset action for it, and I invite you to do it. If the prop is not continue, you add here an else, and what you dispatch is a reset. So this bug will be corrected. I invite you to improve it and enhance it and add a reset action with the you just have to set the initial state, so you can avoid this strange bug.